She was only 19, and in just 90 seconds, her life was stolen. That's how quickly police believe Audrey Griffin was attacked, overpowered, and drowned in a quiet creek just minutes from home. But what makes this even more chilling? Her alleged killer, a man with a violent history, was walking free despite over a dozen prior charges. How did the system miss the signs? And why did it take weeks for the truth about her death to come to light? Welcome to Dark Crime Vault, where the darkest mysteries are brought to light. If you're into true crime stories that dig deep, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a case. Thank you for watching and being part of the vault. Audrey Griffin was a bright, athletic 19-year-old with her whole life ahead of her, until a night out ended in tragedy. On March 23, 2025, she vanished after leaving a hotel on the New South Wales Central Coast. Less than 24 hours later, her body was discovered in Erina Creek, partially submerged and surrounded by questions. At first, police suspected a tragic accident. But as her grieving family demanded answers, unsettling details began to surface. Clues of a violent struggle, DNA evidence, and a mysterious man seen nearby that night. Weeks later, a shocking arrest was made. 53-year-old Adrian Noel Torrens, a man with a long history of domestic violence. The case that once looked like a drowning now pointed to something far more disturbing: a brutal murder and a system that failed to stop it. From the moment Audrey Griffin's body was found in Erina Creek, the investigation into her death was clouded with confusion, missed signals, and deeply troubling questions. At first, authorities treated the case as a possible accidental drowning, citing a lack of immediate signs of foul play. But for Audrey's family, that explanation never made sense. Audrey was a strong swimmer, a trained surf lifesaver, and someone who had no reason to be in that remote, dark creek in the early hours of the morning. The idea that she simply fell in and drowned didn't add up. So what really happened to her? As public pressure mounted and the family pushed for answers, the case began to unravel, and what came to light was deeply alarming. Surveillance footage captured Audrey near the creek shortly before her death, followed by a man in a red tank top and white cap. Most damning of all, forensic evidence revealed defensive wounds and the DNA of another person, later identified as Adrian Noel Torrens, beneath Audrey's fingernails. This wasn't an accident. This was an attack. But perhaps the most disturbing challenge of all lies in the man accused of her murder. Adrian Torrens wasn't a stranger to police. He had a long and violent criminal history, including multiple domestic violence charges and repeated breaches of apprehended violence orders. At the time of Audrey's death, he was living freely in the community on a court-issued supervision order. That begs a series of urgent and painful questions. Why was a known repeat offender still on the streets? Why wasn't he monitored more closely? And could Audrey's murder have been prevented if the justice system had acted more decisively? The investigation into Audrey's death exposes a troubling pattern, not just in how cases like hers are handled, but in how often red flags are ignored. It challenges us to consider the gaps in our legal and correctional systems that allow violent individuals to reoffend, sometimes with devastating consequences. The public outcry that followed was not only for justice for Audrey, but for change, because this wasn't just one young woman's tragedy. It was a brutal example of a system failing to protect the vulnerable, even when the warning signs were clear. In the days following Audrey Griffin's death, what began as a confusing and heartbreaking tragedy quickly evolved into a complex and chilling investigation. The timeline of events on the night she died became central to understanding what really happened, and in unraveling the truth, disturbing details came to light. On the night of March 23, 2025, Audrey had been out with friends at the Gosford Hotel on the central coast of New South Wales. Described as cheerful and full of life, she left the venue sometime after 2 a.m., reportedly planning to take a taxi or rideshare home. But she never made it back. By 5 p.m. that same day, Audrey's mother, Kathleen, reported her missing. Concerned by her sudden disappearance and knowing her daughter's responsible nature, she feared the worst. The next day, March 24th, Audrey's body was discovered partially submerged in Erina Creek, just a short distance from where she was last seen. Initially, Police suggested she may have accidentally fallen into the water and drowned. However, her family quickly rejected this theory. Audrey was a strong athlete, a skilled swimmer, and a trained surf lifesaver. Someone who would not have easily lost her footing near water, let alone drowned without a struggle. What truly began to shift the investigation was a mix of forensic evidence and public assistance. Surveillance footage emerged showing Audrey walking along the entrance road, followed closely by a man wearing a red tank top and white cap. This person of interest became the subject of a public appeal. Residents nearby reported hearing a scream in the early hours of that morning, around 3 a.m., strengthening suspicions that a violent encounter had taken place. Soon, forensic testing revealed DNA under Audrey's fingernails, evidence that she had fought back. This discovery was pivotal. It suggested Audrey had not died by accident, but had been attacked and possibly murdered. Investigators matched the DNA to Adrian Noel Torrens, a 53-year-old man with a long and disturbing criminal record. Torrens' background revealed a deeply troubling pattern of behavior. He had a known history of domestic violence, multiple apprehended violence orders, AVOs, filed against him, and repeated breaches of those orders. In fact, at the time of Audrey's death, Torrens was out on a community corrections order, despite having more than a dozen prior charges related to violence and abuse. Court records later revealed that he had been considered a risk, yet was allowed to walk free with limited supervision. When police arrested Torrens on April 21st, he was charged with Audrey's murder, as well as 11 unrelated domestic violence offenses. According to the allegations, he followed Audrey from the hotel, assaulted her near the creek, and when she fought back, he struck her and held her head underwater until she stopped struggling. Her final moments were ones of fear, resistance, and pain. But the case took another shocking turn just 3 days later. On April 24th, Torrens was found dead in his cell at Silverwater Correctional Complex in Sydney. Authorities treated his death as a suicide, though it left many unanswered questions, and robbed Audrey's family of the chance to see justice play out in court. Throughout the investigation, the community was rocked by grief, anger, and disbelief. How could someone so dangerous be left free to harm again? Why did it take so long for the case to be treated as a homicide, despite the signs? And what does this say about the broader systems meant to protect people like Audrey? As vigils were held and rallies formed across the Central Coast, Audrey's story became more than just a tragic loss. It became a catalyst for national outrage. The deeper the investigation went, the more it revealed not just about one man's violence, but about the many failures that let it happen. The most shocking moment in Audrey Griffin's case came not during the arrest, nor even in the discovery of her body, but in what investigators uncovered about her killer's past after his death. While Adrian Noel Torrens had already been known for domestic violence and repeated AVO breaches, it wasn't until his sudden suicide in jail on April 24th that the full extent of his disturbing history came to light, and it changed everything. Following his death, journalists and advocates began digging deeper, piecing together a trail of warnings, complaints, and missed opportunities that stretched back nearly 2 decades. What they found was staggering. Torrens hadn't just been violent in the past. He had a long pattern of psychological torment, manipulation, and stalking that had escalated over time. Former partners came forward with harrowing accounts of being followed, threatened, and physically assaulted, sometimes for months or years after ending the relationship. One ex-wife revealed that on the very night Audrey was killed, Torrens had sent chilling late-night messages to her phone. Messages that hinted at rage, control, and a potential desire to harm someone. But the most terrifying revelation was that Torrens had a pattern of fixating on young women, particularly those he perceived as independent or out of his league. He was known to frequent local bars and cafes, watch from a distance, and follow women he found attractive. Behavior dismissed for years as creepy but not criminal. Multiple reports to police from women in the Gosford and Central Coast areas documented encounters with a man matching his description, often involving stalking or unsolicited approaches. None of these resulted in serious legal consequences. Even more unsettling, in the weeks leading up to Audrey's murder, several residents had called authorities about a man lurking around Erina Creek in the early hours of the morning. He was reportedly watching women jogging or walking alone. The calls were logged, but no follow-up occurred. Audrey may not have been a random target. She may have been watched and followed, possibly even days before her death. This new information reframed the case entirely. Torrens wasn't just a violent man who snapped. He was a predator whose behavior had escalated in plain sight, repeatedly overlooked by a system that failed to take early warning signs seriously. His murder of Audrey wasn't just a random act of violence. It was the devastating result of years of systemic neglect, with red flags waving at every turn. What made this climax especially gut-wrenching was the realization that Audrey's death could have been completely preventable. Had any one of the prior complaints about Torrens been treated with greater urgency, had his disturbing fixation patterns been flagged, or had his court orders been properly enforced, Audrey Griffin might still be alive. In the wake of these revelations, the narrative shifted from the horror of a single crime to the profound failure of institutions meant to protect. Audrey's murder was no longer seen as an isolated tragedy. It became a mirror reflecting the dangers of ignoring persistent violence against women and the lethal cost of a system that treats patterns of abuse as minor offenses instead of the ticking time bombs they are. The tragic case of Audrey Griffin is more than a story of a young woman whose life was taken far too soon. It is a sobering reflection of the failures in our justice and protection systems. Audrey, just 19 years old, vanished after a night out with friends and was found dead the next day. Her death initially ruled an accident, but as her family fought for answers, the truth began to unravel. Audrey had been attacked, and her final moments were filled with fear and resistance. What followed was a shocking turn of events. The arrest of 53-year-old Adrian Noel Torrens, a man with a long and violent history, exposed deep flaws in how the system handles repeat offenders. Despite multiple domestic violence charges and court orders, Torrens remained free until he took Audrey's life. His sudden death in custody seemed to close the case, but in reality, it opened up even more disturbing questions. Investigations into his past revealed years of stalking behavior, ignored warnings, and a pattern of predatory fixation on women that had gone unchecked. This case is a painful reminder that violence against women rarely happens in isolation. It builds over time, often overlooked until it's too late. The complexities of Audrey's murder lie not just in the crime itself, but in everything that came before it. The warning signs, the ignored reports, the legal leniency, and the gaps in enforcement that allowed a known threat to strike again. Audrey's death has sparked public outcry, vigils, protests, and renewed calls for reform. It forces us to ask, how many more lives must be lost before we take these signs seriously? How do we create a system that not only punishes violence but prevents it? As we remember Audrey Griffin, we must carry forward the lessons her story has revealed. Justice cannot be reactive. It must be proactive, vigilant, and unrelenting in its duty to protect the vulnerable. Audrey deserved that, and so does every woman who lives in fear, waiting for someone to finally take her safety seriously. Audrey Griffin's story is heartbreaking, but it's also a wake-up call. Now it's your turn to speak up. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you believe enough was done to protect Audrey? Or do you think the system failed her like it has failed so many others? Let me know in the comments below. Your voice matters, and continuing this conversation helps keep pressure on the people and systems responsible for real change. Also, if there's another true crime case you'd like me to cover, whether it's a well-known mystery or a hidden story that deserves more attention, drop your suggestions in the comments. I'm always looking for cases that spark deeper questions and uncover the truth that lies beneath the headlines.